I've worked with smaller companies, and it's like, what's your 20-year vision? They don't have one. So how is someone going to believe who you are if you've actually got no direction?
It's about leveling up, being continuously learning, always be aspirational about what's possible, but also you challenging what the current status quo is.
And you see that children want the world to change, and they want it to be different, and they want it to be better. We often just put up with okay, right? Or it's always been done this way. And that's probably the death of any business, right?
You're talking about 10, 20, 50, 100 years plus mentality. And that's really hard to do when I'm putting myself or my community in the middle and I have needs tomorrow.
Build the direction, build the vision. Without that, you're going nowhere, right? You either choose to be part of the future or you're a passenger on someone else's future that they're building.
Well, welcome back to the Future Human Experience. I am so excited to not only have a guest here today, our guest Nick Badminton, but a fellow friend, a fellow mentor, someone who's been so generous with me over my career as a speaker, and as someone that's been very passionate about the future. Nick, thank you so much for being on the Future Human Experience.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here in Scottsdale. You know, it's been a while. We've been talking about this, so I'm happy to unpack things. You know?
Yes. So first off, we have to highlight your great book back in 2023, Facing Our Futures.
Yeah.
Share with us a little bit more about not only what this book is, and of course we'll dive into later on about what's next. But this book had been a big impact on the work that I get to do today.
Yeah.
So share with us a little bit more about what inspired you to create this.
So I wrote an article. Let's go back. So back in 2011, 2012, I started running my own conferences, and they're very much about the future of humanity and technology. And one of the things that came from that was something that came from a conversation in a bar with three of my friends one afternoon. And
it sounds like a setup for a joke.
Yeah, it is. Like so basically, there were four of us. My friend Ryan, who's an experienced designer, he does a lot of blockchain stuff now. A great friend of mine, Karis, who I've known since I was 14. Real disruptor, a big designer of tech and augmented reality, real inventor, like great guy. A guy called Nick Black, who's this research, incredible brain. I did tons of research. We've gone viral and with Vice and Sputnik and BBC and a bunch of people. And we were just having a beer and talking about the strangest things in the world, like, you know, like sharks under the ocean in Thailand chewing internet cables. Yeah. And my buddy Nick was talking about, you know, how the width of your chin like denotes your likelihood to cheat on someone. It was like super bizarre. And I was like, this would be great for an evening conference. So did something called Dark Futures. Yeah. And Microsoft let me use their office in Vancouver. I got quite well known for doing future stuff. And about 50 people turned up. The four of us did our keynotes, and you can still see them online. And over 6 years, we produced about something like 55, 56 different keynotes. We called it the Black Mirror of TED Talks, or someone else called it. And so it was all about dystopian thinking and all about strangeness and, you know, the hidden systems in the world. And so then I was asked by my friend Bronwyn Williams and Theo Priestley to write a chapter for their book, The Future Starts Now. So I wrote a chapter, like 1,200 words or so, called Starting with Dystopia. Yeah. The idea that if you start with an idea of how bad it can get, that you can actually start to work out how good you can make it. Right? That was through Bloomsbury. I then chatted to they made it the first chapter, the only chapter of their book. And then I was doing lectures on that. And then Bloomsbury and me, we had a conversation. I said, I can write an entire book about this. They're like, okay, they hadn't really published like Futurists or anything like that. They sort of took a chance with Facing Our Futures. So they signed me. I put the manuscript together by the end of 2021. I handed it in and my editor quit. Not because of me, just because he was going somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of floated in the ether. And eventually, you know, the managing editor, Ian, looked at it, said, hey, there's a great book in here somewhere. I'd written something like 90,000 words. So I cut it down and really worked it out. And then we released it on Valentine's Day in 2023. And no one expected anything. I liked it.
It's a great book.
Yeah, JP Morgan put it on their summer reading list and bought 2,000 copies. Wow. It won a bunch of awards and stuff. And sold like several thousand copies.
Yes,
So he's done
it's a big
modestly
deal.
well. But it sort of opened the doors to a number of things. I've got a number of different publishing houses asking me to publish. I'm actually publishing my next book through Page Two out of Canada, which is sort of more hybrid publishing, called the Hope Engineers Playbook. And now I've gone away from like dystopian, framing of everything to like ultra positive, where we can go, but still understanding that we have to understand, if we make bad decisions, things happen.
Yeah, and for me, Nick, that was a huge aha moment when I started getting introduced to your approach on the foresight muscle, right? And how we're building our futures. And as someone that's always been very optimistic about the future, when I started reflecting, when I started reading the idea of introducing the dystopian approach, or at least understanding it, was for me, I was always very comfortable with that. I was never someone that avoided it. I was always very comfortable with it, but exactly like you were saying, the approach was to understand it so we could better prepare how we are building the future today. And that's what makes me very optimistic about the future, was because we're willing enough to have these open conversations about, hey, if we're implementing these either resources or how we're doing things, either in a community versus another community, what is the second, third order effect? And I think in how you place that here and how you even set us up, you show even some use cases, which are fascinating. We'll dive into some of those too. But that was very impactful for me. So just I want to say, as someone that has consumed your stuff and built the work, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I sort of come from, I don't come from a foresight university-driven background. I actually come from applied psychology, computing. I did artificial intelligence and linguistics. I worked in strategy and technology my whole career, and sort of landed in this place where I learned more about foresight, and I had great mentorship. I run futurist.com, as you know, and that's from my mentor, Glenn Heemstra, who's been a futurist for over 40, 50 years. I'm really, really pushing boundaries. And so now, I've got a lot more formal approach and more accepted approach in the foresight world. Right? I like to call it futures exploration. It's a lot less stuffy. And it's a lot more actionable, like just wondering what comes next and shifting that mindset from what is to what if, which is a major piece. And I took that from a book by a guy called Rob Hopkins, which is all about community, creativity, and igniting that. And his book was actually called From What Is to What If. And it changed my world completely. So big shout out to Rob Hopkins. And I have to give that recognition. But just that idea of igniting curiosity, really opening the doors to a possibility of what comes next, and really exploring and being curious. It's such a powerful business tool, and it delivers, higher levels of vigilance, higher profitability, more inclusion and drive in your organization, just all the good stuff that you want in a business that's thinking about the future so they can be prepared for anything that happens. And hey, we're in a world full of like flip-flop and change right now.
Yes, pretty much.
But really, you can start to explore all of this, right? And you can start to think about that and like, how do you react to this? Because right now, there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions, and we saw this in COVID-19. And a lot of people have done planning for something like COVID-19, but everyone just like lost their mind, right? And that's because we're still quite human, right? And so we have to put humans at the center of all of this.
And that's where I want to sync it with what I want to sync up with you on that. Is also that, when we talk about the future, we kind of dive into the headlines of, hey, this is the new AI thing, or this is the new innovation here, or this is the new self-driverless car that we have here in Arizona. You have advocated, along with several others, that I would consider outliers probably 10 years ago, and now are probably in the middle of all this, is saying, no, we need to put humanity in the middle. We need to put people first as we build innovation. And that sometimes requires, what you've also advocated, is even long-term thinking. And by long-term, you're talking about 10, 20, 50, 100 years plus mentality. And that's really hard to do when I'm putting myself or my community in the middle and I have needs tomorrow.
That's right.
Can you share with us a little bit more, Nick, about how have you helped organizations and communities navigate putting themselves first, but also thinking several decades down the road?
Yeah, it's really tricky. The average age of a company, I was just looking this up earlier, in 2025 in the S&P 500 is less than 18 years old. Right? So it's really interesting. I'm actually chatting to a news organization tomorrow that's over 120 years old. So you know,
They're an outlier.
they're an outlier, but there are people that are based on long-term
Great point.
vision,
Yes.
right? Someone like SoftBank, Japanese tech company, Masayoshi Son, super famous guy. He's got a 300-year strategy. So there are people out there that indicate to us that this is worthwhile. I mean, my friend Monica Busquite, she says, you know, in Asia they think in millennia, and we think in decades maybe. Right, but like, you know, being able to look out and where we're going is really important, and having the fortitude to keep going and to keep believing that something is going to change the right kind of way. I mean, we see a lot of the biggest challenges in the world that we have to solve, and they're not going to be solved, but we're going to have to become more resilient over the decades. I mean, humanity is incredibly good at survival, right? If you go back like 12,000 years. To like cities like Uruk or whatever, the first civilizations in large cities, it came from agricultural production at a larger scale and whatever. And it's like, yeah, they've had famines and droughts and floods. They've had a lot of different weather catastrophes. They've had lots of wars. And this is the human cycle. The civilization is built, unfortunately, by war and taxes.
Yeah.
And I really hope that that's not a future trajectory. Right? But like when we start to think about that, getting people really investing, it's easy if you're like a multi-trillion-dollar company to invest in the next 100 years. It's really difficult if you're a small startup that's just trying to work out where we're going. But I've worked with smaller companies, and it's like, what's your 20-year vision? They don't have one. So how is someone going to believe who you are if you've actually got no direction? Like having a 5-year plan to get acquired means your valuation is going to be in the floor and you're going to be selling widgets. Having an idea of where you are and its impact in the world in the next 20 years, and you're building the next hundreds of billions of dollars of valuation company or $1 trillion company or whatever, because that's where, you know, Salesforce came from, right? I was working in the CRM space when they came up. And you could just see that they were like scrappy, fighting, but they were going to become so. Google, same thing. Like Facebook, same thing. All these companies came, but they all got big because they had a vision, and they set that, you know, 20, 30 plus year like vision in place, and they've got vigilance of where we're going, right? And you also see this in traditional industry. When you're building infrastructure like roads or railways or large buildings, they're around for decades. So you have to have a futures mindset just to be able to, you know, create a maintenance plan, right? So why don't we like go overboard and say, you know, we don't need a maintenance plan, we need a preparation for what comes next, but also a plan to get bigger and better and to learn together and to empower everyone in our organization to be curious. I always say that there's zero risk in doing futures work because it's all hypothetical. But you're either part of a future conversation or you're just like watching it in a passive way, and you're going to be a victim for it, right? So that's that. I mean, this is how I get people jazzed up. This is how executives are like, we're going to get in the game. And you sort of pull. You know, there's a few studies out there that say, you know, companies that do this are like 33% more profitable, higher rates of growth, and you know they've got
probably retain more employees as well.
Yeah, retain more employees, 2x market cap. So why not, right?
Exactly.
And again, because it's not a risk, and you start to embed that in an organization, like innovation was, you embed it in an organization. You don't have a team in the corner doing it. You might have some futurists that do the work that gets people talking, but you got to bring people along, and that's why I write books. That's why I do TV and radio podcasts to really get people talking about it, right? And it's interesting to really do that work and to push things forward. It's also really challenging because people struggle to identify what they're going to do at the weekend. You know?
And it's hard. And Nick, I mean, let's put this to task here, right? We're in the second sunniest city in North America right now, in the Valley of the Sun. I remember when I moved here 15 years ago, you know, solar panels were starting to get put on residential houses, on our offices. And I remember telling my wife, I'm like, honey, in 10 years, 15 years down the road, man, we're going to live in this energy utopia. Like, isn't it going to be awesome that we pick this city out of all the places? It's going to be great. and we're going to harness this energy and really figure out how to, where energy flows, wealth flows too, right? I mean, that's what you've seen in communities historically happen. I was like, Phoenix and the Valley of the Sun is going to be that. Well, Nick, we're 15 years down the road and we're still struggling to figure out what does a sustainable energy strategy look like, or how do we harness this wonderful resource that we have. With the work that you've been doing, not only with your clients, but in communities and organizations, when it comes to energy, what have we not cracked yet? And how can your work or the perspective that you're trying to build up, what are we missing in this conversation?
Yeah, part of this is around belief, and belief from an individual level, and affordability, which is from the market dynamics of materials and installation and companies available to do this, and policy and regulations of the United States, for example. Meanwhile, in California, right? If we look over in California, there's a whole lot of solar going.
Yes.
Right? I did a study for a Chinese battery company a number of years ago. And it was through a friend of mine, and I was sort of the secret guy in the background writing stuff. And I said, you want to be selling, you want to be selling home battery storage in Florida and in Texas, right? And that was a pretty good bet, because both those places need resilient off-grid storage. Right? It's mad. So I'm doing tons of renewable energy transition keynotes this year. And I think it's there's something like 120,000 miles of high transmission electrical lines in the US, run by 500 companies. We've got a problem. We've got a problem of an over-administration, kind of a loosely regulated, fragmented system of energy, and everyone's desperately fighting for survival. New technology like solar comes in, and solar is the largest contributor to additional
demand or
terawatts on the grid, like in the US and everywhere. And the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration and everyone put together, and wherever that's going to go right now with the new administration, is responsible for a lot of growth. And people do believe, it's just that sometimes the ideas come too early. But here's the thing about energy. If you can, say, put solar cells on this building and battery storage, you're off-grid, you change the entire dynamic of the business case and the business model. That's what a lot of people that are doing their this doesn't work from, I've done the calculations, but they haven't done decentralized energy calculations. That's what's interesting. But then we have to maintain it. And we have to be, have that maintenance plan. That's what's really tricky, is that humans don't want to manage the infrastructure. That's why, we plug in, we draw electricity off the grid, we pay for that. When you've actually got the infrastructure to manage, it becomes really tricky. So there are some stifling parts of what's happened and that sort of thread of like the last 10 to 15 years. But it doesn't mean that we won't ever get over it. It doesn't mean that wasn't a useful signal. I've been doing, so my new keynote on energy, I sort of start off by asking, when was the first solar cell invented? Now, do you know?
No.
Guess, just guess.
1940s.
1857.
What? I was off 100 years.
Yeah, so 1857, and the first rooftop solar panel, like array, was in New York City around about 1900. And everyone's like, what? And it's been around. I mean, there's actually a solar cell on an older satellite that's still flying around the Earth, taking photos from 65 years ago that's still working, still generating energy. So I sort of remind people that this technology's been around for a long time. The technology's not broken. The scalability, we're getting there. So glass that produces energy is like going to be a new thing. If you say you took the One World Trade Center in New York City and you covered that with solar glass, it would power like 335,000 homes. That's the kind of thing that I call them signals of change that indicate that things are coming. Does it mean that it's affordable today? No. Does it mean that it's available today in abundance? Not necessarily. Does it mean that in 30, 40 years' time it will be? It's interesting there, right? 20 years' time, this conversation about solar and energy resiliency is going to be very different.
Absolutely.
Because good technology just takes over from bad technology. Unfortunately, like fossil fuels are no longer the most efficient kind of way of delivering energy to vehicles, to homes and whatever, right? but we're just getting to the point where the technology is mature enough to deliver this, right?
So directionally, we're going that way.
Yeah.
But right now, you're right. The 10, 15 years feel like a long time, but eventually it's that gradually, then suddenly effect, right?
Exactly. It's
all of a sudden it's everywhere now.
Yeah, we're a overnight business success that took 23 years. Exactly. Right? It's like Netflix, right? I remember seeing someone give a presentation, and she'd taken some slides off of someone from an organization I won't talk about. And all these companies are only 9 years old, and it had Netflix up there. I'm like, that's not right. I was in the back at this conference. I didn't particularly like this individual because they weren't factually correct. And it was like, it was like at that point Netflix was like 19 years old. Yeah. They spent most of the lifespan of their company like not streaming, but just like
the DVDs,
posting DVDs around the country, right? But like think about that with energy. So your neighbor's going to have solar, but you're not going to have it. But then one day you might have that as a neighborhood solar panel. Then eventually everyone's got it, right? The Internet of Energy is going to be something that does exist. In about 30, 40 years, the global supergrids, and it's going to happen at a local scale. Yeah, Phoenix.
Yes.
The second fastest growing city in North America. I'm from Toronto, the fastest growing city in North America. There's a lot less sun, and I'm really happy to be down here. But like, it's really interesting. It's like the opportunity. When I was in Las Vegas, just one more story, we'll move off of energy. I did a keynote at the MGM. And it was about 2,000 people. It was really, really fun. It was people that actually worked in cabling for data, called Bixie, and they're really, really cool people, infrastructure. And I was walking through the MGM to this big conference room, and there's this big digital billboard. And it said, did you know that there are something like 33,000 solar cells on the roof of this casino? I'm like, no, I didn't. And then you look it up, and they've got something like 300,000+ solar cells outside of Vegas that runs 90% of the energy they use whilst it's daylight in Las Vegas across 14 properties.
What?
Where's the future? Las Vegas.
Yes.
And why do they do it? Because they know how to really create resilient, sustainable, cheap operations so they can make the most amount of money. Right? So it's kind of interesting. There are beacons of light in the strangest places out there to really say, hey, the world can be different. Right? Yes.
Nick, with that said, the other thing too, I love about not only the work about the future, but also when I get some questions about what encouraged me to have that optimistic perspective.
Yeah.
And also reading through your book and just getting to know you a little bit more over the last few years, is that reflected that I think my perspective of the future started changing when I became a dad. And but not only that, but I started thinking about why I've always been optimistic about the future too. Before I became a dad, it was because I was looking forward to being a dad one day. Right? Like even though I didn't have kids, even though I was not married, even though I was not dating my wife at that time, I still felt like I need to be part of building a much more optimistic, much more rewarding future in the shoulders, or be those shoulders for that next generation. What was that for you? Like, did you have these moments that you're like, okay, this is the type of work I want to do. These are the type of conversations I want to have with the communities and with leaders. Like, what gets you up on? I mean, tomorrow you have 2 keynotes. What's getting you up there to be like, man, like this is a privilege to have an opportunity to do this?
You know what? Like, I get excited about the strangest industries. I'm giving a keynote to a global workforce mobility company, and then I'm giving a virtual keynote to over 120-year-old like news organization in 3 hours, right? So
you got this.
It's fine. We've got this, but like, it's gonna be tired after. But I mean, what gets me? I mean, I've got a 4.5-year-old son. When I started out on this journey of building futures, I wasn't really thinking about being a dad. I wasn't that excited. But then at a certain point, I was like really turned on by the idea because of this hopeful future. A great friend of mine said to me, I was like, well, how come you got 2 kids? It was like always the guy that was never going to have kids. He goes, who's going to save the world, man? And I get it, right? So, and I've started doing I'm doing like 30-year planning right now for myself. And it's like, okay. And now you're trying to work out your sort of journey through life and what I'm going to do from a fatherhood, work, partner perspective, in a relationship. And that sort of drives me forward. But like, you realize that there's so many different companies and there's so many good thinkers and there's so many people that are part of this patchwork of momentum going forward that we have to enable them somehow. The book helps me do it at scale. Doing TV, doing podcasts and radio helps me do that at scale. Doing keynotes puts me in front of the people that hopefully have got some money to do that then scales up as well. So that's what I'm trying to do, right? Get on the road and really help people to sort of level up. I mean, it gives you an impetus and a drive. You know, I'm not just earning money so I can take a vacation. I'm trying to build a foundation for future generations. It's quite a profound shift. And it's a profound shift because we have to realize that the human race doesn't change from its value system. You know, we like certainty, variety, significance, and growth, and connection, love. You know, all the good stuff. You know, Tony Robbins kind of vibe. But we've been that way for tens of thousands of years. We'll be that way. Community and togetherness and technology and everything is going to be that fabric that we have to create a foundation for. And we can't just stand still, right? We're not huddled around a radio getting the news anymore, right? Yeah. Some people will like that. Sure. Nostalgia is a thief of good thinking. Yeah. Oh. So we got to be productive. We got to step over, and we got to say, you know, what if the world changes, and what's going to happen in that world? It's terribly inconvenient, the future. Yeah. But at the same time, we don't necessarily have to embrace it. We can challenge it. I say that futurism is activism. You know, good thinking sort of really takes us to the next level. We need that. That's what profit looks like, right? And it's not really just money. It's about human capability, right? And dominant narratives can sometimes really muddy the waters because it's just people trying to make cash, right? Build market cap. I teach people how to look beyond that.
Absolutely. Right? And I would say, right now, what you just shared with us, that the future human experience is about leveling up, right? That is what your call is. That's what you've not only called for us with your book, but the work that you get to do. Yeah. Nick, so with that said, again, we're both parents now. Yeah. What would be your encouragement now to not only parents, but educators, folks that are passionate about the next generation, to have that foresight muscle or to be that aspirational futurist? Yeah, but before foresight, it's just about curiosity, right? Over the weekend, I've been teaching my 4.5-year-old how to play chess. Ooh, I love it. He's not bad. He's not bad. They suck it all in. I mean, they're sponges, right? My partner is like, you can't just beat him, okay? And it's like, you know, I'm not a great chess player, I'll be honest, but I'm okay. But like, it's interesting, you know, you're teaching curiosity, you're teaching strategic dynamics. You're not actually teaching kids future anything. Kids are excited. So at the weekend, I took a Waymo, right? My kid wanted to take a Waymo. Sarah wanted to take a Waymo. That's cool. So we did, and it was quite mundane and quite boring. That's when you know technology has really made it. You know, the internet isn't that exciting. You know, social media isn't that exciting. It's just a thing. Waymo is just a thing. It's a fairly capable driver. Shrug. My kid spent the next 3 hours pretending to be a Waymo. So at the weekend, my partner Sarah and our kid wanted to take a Waymo, right? Google's autonomous vehicle division, $45 billion market cap, right? There's 700 of them here. Yes, it's very normal to see them all the time. Yeah, all the time. And it's like a gimmick, and people want to use it. A bit like when he first started using Uber. In fact, they're on the Uber app as well. They could turn up. What? Yeah. They just turn up and whatever. It's all good, and it is quite normal once you take one. And whatever. But this mundanity of future tech, it means that, you know, it's quite normal. A friend of mine said it was Jonathan Brill said, you know, it's just boring now. And that's okay. And you know, social media is boring. The internet is boring. But it's what we do with it, right? It's not the vehicle and the ride. It's where it takes you, right? Being like deeply philosophical and whatever. But it's kind of interesting. What was really fascinating about this was that my kid pretended to be a Waymo for the remainder of the day. And he'd go up and he'd come up to me, he goes, Waymo. I was like, okay, can we go to the swimming pool? He goes, yep, get in.
taking off and driving, and he'd learn all of the prompts that the car was giving us.
That is cool.
And luckily he stopped after a couple of hours. But it's kind of interesting, right? When you see these things and you see the world changing, and you see that children want the world to change, and they want it to be different, and they want it to be better. We often just put up with okay, right? Or it's always been done this way. And that's probably the death of any business, right? It's always been done this way. That's why the average age of a company, I think I mentioned earlier, is less than 18 years in the S&P 500.
So with that said, then Nick, then I would use that and challenge everyone that's listening to this conversation right now. If you're in your organization and you hear those comments, oh, this is just the way we did it, or this is your opportunity to level up. Like this, if you want not only your company to be sustainable, but your career to continue to be relevant in the work that you get to do, it's about leveling up, being continuously learning, always be aspirational about what's possible, but also you challenging what the current status quo is.
Yeah, who are you going to be in 5 years? Who are you going to be in 10 years? Who are you going to be in 20 years? Right?
Yeah.
Culture doesn't cut it at that, as a conversation. We've got great culture. Culture delivers a good feeling, and that's all. It's mostly just like firmware.
Yeah.
What you want is something which is like a direction. Build the direction, build the vision. Without that, you're going nowhere, right? You either choose to be part of the future, or you're a passenger on someone else's future that they're building, right? And this is what happened, right? This is what happened to all the companies that used to be at the top of the most valuable companies in the world list, right? And now it's like Nvidia, and it's Google, and it's Microsoft, and it's Apple, right?
Yeah, I used to do this keynote, Nick, that I would rank the top 10 companies through market cap.
Yeah.
When I started off as a freshman in high school, and then when I finished as a
I
college graduate.
used to do the same.
It's just like you think you're going into this reality, and it completely changes, right? And that was what in the 90s and early 2000s. I could just imagine how fast it's changing now. Maybe that's something.
Well, when you flip it and you look at revenues, it all changes because it's like Walmart. It's like food, energy. It's different, right?
Okay.
Because of human needs. So you got to look at it through multiple angles. But I used to do exactly the same. It was like a futurist thing. It was like 10 years ago. Here's the top 5, and now I don't do it anymore because it became too much. Too strange. Plus, everyone knows these big tech companies are worth a lot of money. Right?
With that said, Nick, again, just want to thank you for coming here. But one of the things we like to do all the time with our guests, and I'm really excited to have you here, is I asked them for I call it a surprise question.
Sure.
But we've gotten to know each other for the last couple of years. You've seen, I've seen all your work, and you've also seen my work too.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to see what curiosity you have about me or my work or my story.
You and your work in thinking about, customer experience and evolution of that, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting to think about someone not being a customer and actually just being that sort of journey person, the person that comes along on the journey? You see companies like Disney or IKEA or Louis Vuitton even create the journey, right? So the question I have for you is, how do you get people to shift from strategic planning about delivery of like profit and good feelings from culture to something that creates a roadmap for a journey?
That's a great question. One of the things that I try to encourage folks when we do our talks is to think, when you think about the human element of it, one of the things I ask them is like, what makes us human? And what I find fascinating about those conversations, regardless of who I'm talking to, educators, CTOs, CEOs, program managers, leaders, the answers are almost all the same.
Yeah.
Right? It's what makes us uniquely human is empathy, love, care for others, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And so the question is, when we start thinking about the work that we get to do, it's much more just beyond what I guess the immediate measurements are, which could be profit, could be immediate revenue, which is all great and it's all important. But if we look beyond that, if we look beyond that table, beyond that statistic, what else is there? And it goes back to like finding that meaningful, finding that purpose, finding those employees that care about this work or that leader that cares about this work. When you're able to find that and either share that story or share that aspiration or share that future that you care about a lot too, man, that moves folks, right? So I don't think it's just that it moves them to be inspired,
Yeah.
but moves them into action, which I think is the other thing too. You call us a lot to do.
Yeah.
Is hey, you're listening to this conversation today on this podcast, and it's great and it's informative, but what can I do differently tomorrow because I just spent 30 minutes with Nick and Eric?
Yeah.
Like that's really cool, and that's what I always aspire to do.
I love it. You know, we don't use terms like love in the context of business enough.
Yes.
Right? I did an after-dinner keynote to a group of CEOs of this large engineering conglomerate, and it's like, you know, your work is all about love. And I did this whole spiel. And at the end, the main CEO guy came in, and he was like, he was like shook up because he's like, I never talk about love in the context of our organization. I said, it's kind of profound, no? And it's like, how often do people say that they love their colleagues? I mean, it's like, I love my employees. We're like a family. It's like old and jaded and kind of means nothing. But building real, true love in the mix is really important. A big shout out to Seth Madison.
Absolutely,
on
Seth
that.
is awesome.
On that kind of, and hey, like, you know, it's a rough journey trying to even talk about love.
Absolutely.
In the context of business. But, you know, maybe that'll be my third book, Eric.
There you go. But Nick, with that said, you do have a second book coming.
I do.
You hinted it earlier in our episode, but share with us a little bit more. What's in the works?
So I'm calling it a trilogy of books, right? It's like marketing.
So we're about to hit.
It's marketing.
So Empire Strikes Back version.
Exactly. Empire Strikes Back. So facing our futures, you know, the big sort of like all of the future stuff out of Nick's brain into the pages, positive dystopian future framework, good stuff. Right, all very practical. Yes. The next book is called The Hope Engineer's Playbook, which is very short, and it's supposed to have like prompts and ideas about building hope in an organization, because hope in a modern context helps you build goals and agency and also dictates pathways forward, right? And futures supercharges that to look out 10 plus years, right? So that's just a quick one. Maybe the third book will be about love.
That's awesome.
But it has to be in a way that's practical.
There
right?
you go.
And it's tricky. You've got to break down some boundaries, right? I mean, it's got. Back in the day, I used to talk about biohacking employees and how, like, if you hug someone for 30 seconds, it releases oxytocin, right? Yeah. But that's pretty awkward in a modern
30 seconds
in a modern business place. But we're getting there.
Yeah, Latinos, we hug. We hug for a while. I mean, we can
maybe
embrace.
not 30 seconds.
Not 30 seconds.
Okay.
Unless we're in a dance floor or something. But Nick, with that said, Facing Our Futures is out now. It's on Audible as well, which is fantastic. Yeah. Kindle, print as well.
Super affordable paperback version.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then you have your new book coming out soon. But also how people can connect with you, find you. What's your main platform?
I run futurist.com. If you type in the word futurist, you'll find me on the internet everywhere. So that's pretty useful. Nikolas Badminton. There's two of us called Nikolas Badminton in the world.
That's cool.
I'm the futurist. The other guy's in South Africa, who's a retail guy that looks nothing like me. So it's easy to find me. Just type in Nick Futurist and you'll find me. People can just email me at nicholas@futurist.com. Find me on LinkedIn. I like chatting to everyone. It's about community and building momentum forward together.
Yeah. Well, we'll link up to all those in our show notes. Nick, thank you so much for being here. You've been an inspiration not only for me, but so many others.
Thank you.
The Future Human Experience is part of the work that you start planting here. Just thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your mentorship.
It's all good, man.
And thank you again for being here with us.
I feel we'll do this again. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, you got it, brother.
We'll do this again. Take care.
Hey, everyone. This is Eric, the host of the Future Human Experience. The reason why this podcast was created was to be a platform for others to really bring these conversations to life. So if you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe. It will really help our channel and expose these ideas for others. Thank you.